Hello everybody and welcome to Forever Sports. And Nigel Owens has become the latest person to weigh in on the potential changes to rugby benches. Basically, once again, sort of taking a bit of aim at the bomb squad. And the nice thing is, from a Springbok point of view, is that we're not the only ones with this bomb squad, and therefore, it's not just an anti-Springbok bias. It's now, for example, also an anti-France in terms of the teams that effectively use bomb squads. And we're going to go through his comments and talk about whether they have any value and kind of what changes we might see from World Rugby. And I think the biggest issue I have is that we are now looking to change the rules for exceptional circumstances. We're talking about a bomb squad concept, a 7-1 split, a 6-2 split, where only certain teams actually even have the sort of players to be able to pull it off. It's not a in case of emergency break glass solution that can basically be copied and pasted across any team. Otherwise, everybody would be doing it. You'd be seeing it at URC level. You'd be seeing it at Champions and Challenge Cup level. You'd see more teams starting to recruit forward base, and they can just deploy a 7-1 split. It's not that simple. I think that's my maybe biggest frustration, is that we continuously make it a very simplistic point of view in terms of, well, anybody can do it, and they can't. The reason that the bomb squad really came into be was the fact that the Box had a generational set of forwards, and more so a generational set of locks, really, in terms of having probably 4 of the best 6 locks in the world in their squad at one given time. And as a result, they sort of manipulated the bench to be able to get the best of the resources they had. Other teams have tried 6-2 splits even before the bomb squad, and it didn't really work because it's about the makeup. It's also how you use them. And I think it's very, very worrying for me, the sort of suggestions that we need to now reduce benches, for example, that we need to remove the idea of tactical substitutions, when on the one hand we're talking about player safety. So we're going to go into what he said, and we'll discuss a little bit more. Before we do that, please do smash the like on the video. Please do subscribe to the channel as well. So this is the main part of his quote, saying the first thing I would do is I would reduce the amount of subs. 8 players is too much, saying that the benches at the moment in rugby are too big. And basically, he goes further onto that, and he says, I'd reduce the change and the way you can use them, so it can't be a tactical substitution. It can only be, as it used to be years ago, for an injured player. I think that would open the game up, because you would have players then who would have to play 80 minutes, and instead of carrying 130 kgs, they may have to carry 115 kgs because they need to last 80 minutes. Even Etzebeth lasts 80 minutes. He's that kind of player that can last 80 minutes and has done it, previously in recent times. Peter Steph the Toy lasts 80 minutes, and he's carrying a lot of weight. So again, I think it's a very simplistic way of just saying, well, the reason the players can be so big is because they don't have to run around for 80 minutes, because it's not the case. It really isn't the case. We've got an Andrew Porter, for example, who consistently plays 70 plus minutes for Ireland week in, week out. I also think that we can't sit there talking about player safety. We can't talk there about wanting to make the game safer, reducing HIAs and the likes of that, and then saying we need to remove tactical substitutions. Because tactical substitutions can actually be also done with injuries in mind in terms of player load. You look at, for example, in football, I think is probably always the best one because they've got the best data. But they look to try and bring players back from injuries, for example, by giving them 20 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, or starting them and bringing them off. I mean, that's what the Box do. When the Box have got players who are coming back from injuries, they'll start them and pull them off for 40 minutes because they need to get match fit. They need to get match hard and in conditions which you can't replicate, but they don't want to sort of throw them out into the deep end. So immediately, that is something to really consider. The idea that subs are used to be able to get players back into the game and the likes of that. So that in itself, I think, takes away from player safety. Then the question is, what classifies as an injury? Are we now going to have independent doctors who need to make decisions about whether a player genuinely or is not injured? And that for me becomes a really, really gray area, and I think it's so easily manipulated. You can have a player go down saying, listen, my hamstring's not good at all. They have to make a tactical substitution, inverted commas, and it can change the game. And there's no way of verifying. And I'm not saying that all the players are going to lie and stuff like that, but it can be very easily manipulated. That's far too, simplistic, I think, of a way to sort of draw the line. And I think that it can be exploited, and therefore I don't think it really solves things. And it's going to be interesting to see what World Rugby sort of point of view, because Gregor Townsend obviously came out and had his complaints during the Six Nations, saying, if you want my view, I don't think the bench was set up to suddenly have new forward pack coming on. But that's for World Rugby to decide what you do with the bench and to make many changes. Now, here comes the problem. You go and say, right, you cannot have, you have to have 5 designated forwards and 3 designated backline players on your bench. What happens then when it comes to injuries, for example? And now, what happens if you, as a tactic, for example, when Ches and Colby starts throwing the ball in at the line out, and you've now got your replacement, hooker standing in center? What happens there? Are we now saying you have to have designated roles? You have to say, right, your number 2 or 16 are the only ones that can throw into a lineout, for example. Your 1 through 8 are the only ones that can pack down at the scrum. Again, it can be easily manipulated. Quacker Smith can be named as a backline player. And he comes on for a wing, inverted commas. And the first thing he does is start getting involved in racks and start looking at breakdowns. Again, it can be very easily manipulated, So I don't think that the only sort of way you could do it potentially is reducing the bench. You could reduce down to 6 or 5 even, for example, or 7. But once again, you could then have a 6-1 split. If you're going back to 7, you could have a 5-1 split if you go down to 6. And you could still basically bring on a disproportionate amount of forwards and backs. So I think my biggest problem is that whatever route you go down, there's no way of actually really stopping coaches from being able to bend the rules and make it work for the resources they have. Of all the issues we have in rugby, is this really one of them? And that's kind of my consistent question. Is this really what we need to be worrying about at the moment? We've got the Premiership Rugby, which is an absolute financial disarray. We've got the massive travel logistics and the non-global calendar, which is ruining player welfare because players have been played into the ground. That's what we need to focus on. We've got a massive issues with concussions. That's what we need to focus on. Are we really saying that, the amount of substitutions and the scrum, for example, are number 1 and 2 in the priorities of what we've got to try and fix when it comes to rugby? No. And I think this is my biggest problem, is that we get far too obsessed with minor issues. I genuinely think this is a minor issue, as the 2 teams in the world pull off a 7-1 split. And it's taken how many years of professional rugby before that's been able to actually happen? Even since the Boks deployed the 6-2 split back in 2019, no other teams have really deployed it in the same way. France did it as a 7-1 for the first time since the Boks did in 2023, now in 2025. So 6 years after they recreated the bomb squad concept, and Eddie Jones teased, going over the 7-1 split. But 6 years after the Boks did it, France did it for the first time, really, where they brought on a disproportionate number as a bomb squad. And especially the way you deployed it. I think that's the big thing, It's the bomb squad concept is not about the split of forwards and backs. It's about when you deploy the forwards. It's about bringing them on at the same time for that potential impact. And I also think that, why can't it be a 23-man game? I don't understand why this is not. I think it's a really cool thing that, coaches have to look at nullifying the bench, bringing you on the bench. We're seeing it more and more. It's being used in sport all around the world. Even cricket, for example, in the IPL, I'm not a massive fan of it, but they have the impact player, for example. In football, you bring on players and you can change systems and the likes of that. In your likes of an NFL, you literally bring on attack and defense parts. In the NBA, you've got, replacements. Every sport in the world has got tactical substitutions. In sevens, you've got rolling subs. In hockey, you've got rolling subs. So why all of a sudden are we going to look at rugby and say, right, no, you can only have injury replacements and hope that that's going to suddenly make for a better product? I don't think it will make for a better product. I think we need to simplify the laws. I think you need to find out exactly what you want to do and simplify the laws. I think they're far too complex. I think you need to make a stronger stand on head contact and how to make the game safer while still entertaining. And I think you need to try and give the refs a much easier picture to try and ref. And I think that the results speak for themselves. We're seeing a growth for rugby. It's not like we constantly talk about the crisis in rugby being the fact that there's no fans. There are fans, and it is growing. But I constantly just feel that we're focusing on the wrong issues all the time. When I watch it in a year, I don't look at the 6-1 split and think that's the issue with rugby. I don't. I look at issues like not having a good Curry Cup, for example, and systems like that. I look at the fact that the World Cups are being contested mainly between 4 teams. You go into a World Cup, the fact that only 4 teams have actually won historically the World Cup. That for me is an issue. Not the actual what's been played in the Rugby World Cup final, but why is the Rugby World Cup final always being won by 4 different teams? Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, England. That's it. In 30 years of World Cups? More, I think, actually. And that's what we've had. We've had South Africa win it 4 times. You know, we've had New Zealand win it 3 times. So, you know, it's ridiculous. And again, this is my biggest problem. You know, we're focusing on the wrong issues yet. What we should be focusing on is how do we get Fiji to be competitive? How does Italy win a World Cup? How can they go on these kind of runs? Not, and I don't think that, for example, changing the bench is going to suddenly be an ultimate level across all the teams. So my consistent issue is that we can constantly focus on the wrong issues when it comes to rugby. And I think this is a very big point of that. But what do you think? Do you think we should change the laws? I don't know. Let me know down in the comments below. Smash a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Steve. I'll chat to you soon.